Who are the greatest Atlanta Falcons players of all time? Today we set out to find out the top 10 greatest Atlanta Falcons and who is indeed the greatest Atlanta Falcon of all time. We're going to start off with linebacker Jessie Tuggle. He was a middle/right inside linebacker for the Atlanta Falcons throughout majority of the 1990s. Jessie Tuggle led the league in combined tackles 4 times in his career, including having 200-plus tackles twice in 1990 and 1991. He was also a 5-time Pro Bowler, although I think he should have been a lot more personally. He finished his career with overall 1,805 tackles and 532 solo tackles, although solo tackles weren't recorded in the NFL until 1994, so he could have easily had much more if we're recording some of his best days in his prime, which was obviously the early 1990s. But Jessie Tuggle comes in at number 10. At number 9, we're going to go with Jeff Van Note, guard/center for the Atlanta Falcons throughout majority of the 70s and the 80s. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler and mostly played center. Was a dominant force mostly in the late 70s and the early 1980s. Was an absolute Iron Man for the Atlanta Falcons and definitely worth being on this list for as accomplished as he was. As I forgot to also switch the slide. At number 8, we're going to go with Tommy Nobis, linebacker for the Atlanta Falcons throughout majority of the 70s. Tommy Van Nobis is widely looked at for a lot of people as a top 5 player in Atlanta Falcons history. Personally, I don't have him that high, but nonetheless, I do think he is one of the best players in Atlanta Falcons history. Obviously, early on in his career, he started off really well with a first-team All-Pro selection. He just doesn't have enough longevity in my eyes to warrant him being a top 5 player, although he was an all-decade 1960s player and definitely a beloved franchise legend for the Atlanta Falcons. At number 7, we are going to go with Roddy White, receiver for the Atlanta Falcons in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. He could have probably been a little bit higher had injuries not derailed his career, but he was a guy who had 6 straight 1,100-plus yard seasons, 5 of those having actually 1,200 or more yards. One of the most underrated receivers of the late 2000s, in my opinion. Should have been in consideration for multiple All-Pro selections. Just wasn't. Only a 4-time Pro Bowler, but 1-time first-team All-Pro selection due to the year in 2010 where he led the league in receptions. Roddy White comes in at number 7. At number 6, we're going to go with Mike Kenn. He was an offensive lineman for the Atlanta Falcons throughout majority of the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s as well. Dominant, especially in the early 80s. 4-time All-Pro, 1-time first-team All-Pro selection. Absolutely strong, mammoth of a human being. We're talking about 6'7", 273 pounds. Ridiculously strong and freakishly athletic for that size too. Just an absolute force at the blindside position and an anchor for the Falcons offensive line throughout majority of the 1980s. At number 5, we're going to go with defensive end Claude Humphrey. Humphrey played for the Atlanta Falcons in the 1970s. He was the Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1968, was an All-Pro 5 times in his career, including 2-time first-team All-Pro selection, had double-digit sacks 9 times in his career, including 15.5 sacks, career best for him in 1980. With the Atlanta Falcons, however, 7 of those 9 seasons of double-digit sacks, those were with him, he was creating a lot more pressure. At that time, a lot better of a run defender, a lot more strong, a lot more of a presence as far as taking on double teams, and as far as being active in the as far as batting down footballs and even in coverage. Very versatile player, but mostly known for his innate pass rushing ability throughout the mid-70s. Claude Humphrey comes in at number 5. At number 4, however, this is where the list really starts picking up. There's a huge drop-off after number 4, but the Mount Rushmore of the Atlanta Falcons is very concrete. At 4, we're going to go with Michael Vick. If he had played longer, he could have easily been number 1. First off, one of the guys who is ahead of him wouldn't be on this list had Michael Vick not gotten suspended. But Michael Vick, in just the first 6 seasons of his career, became the greatest rushing quarterback in NFL history. He was that dominant. He took Atlanta to levels that they had never been, excitement that they had never been. He really symbolized and represented the city of Atlanta as far as just his overall swag and his overall play, his overall style of play goes. Multiple times he was an MVP finalist. In my opinion, he could have. There's an argument to be made. He should have won in 2004. And then, obviously, the latter half of his career, he played with the Philadelphia Eagles. But what he did with the Falcons undoubtedly set him as far as one of the greatest Falcons of all time. However, he was just not as dominant at his position compared to the top 3. At number 3, we're going to go with Deion Sanders. If he had played longer, he might have been number 2. As far as prime goes, he is one of the greatest primes of all time. He only played 5 seasons, however, with the Atlanta Falcons. But boy, oh boy, those 5 seasons were just incredible. He, in 1991, arguably had one of the greatest defensive back seasons of all time. 6 interceptions, and somehow did not win Defensive Player of the Year. Didn't even make first-team All-Pro selection. I don't understand how that happened. This guy was absolutely feared when it came to not only being picked off for an opposing quarterback, but returning that down the line. Talking about interception, touchdowns, as far as his ability to cover so many different receivers at that time period. Deion Sanders was feared unlike anything any team had ever seen as far as defensive back, and one of the most smart and technically sound defensive backs in NFL history. And even for the short amount of time he played with the Falcons, two-time first-team All-Pro selection, 3-time Pro Bowl, and one of the greatest seasons of all time for a defensive back. That's enough to put him top 3 for the Atlanta Falcons. But at number 2, we're going to go with a guy who played his entire career, barring the last year of his career, with the Atlanta Falcons. That would be Matt Ryan. I think he is very, very underrated. I think he started his career as looking to be one of the best quarterbacks ever, as far as just winning goes. Maybe not as far as just pure dominance. He picked up as far as dominance really as the 2010 started, and he had 10 straight seasons of 4,000 passing yards, which I really think goes under the radar for how good that era of quarterbacks was. But even before that, 2008, he took a team from the dead and led them to an 11-5 record en route to a Rookie of the Year award. 2 years later, they were 13-3. Even in 2009, they were 9-5 before he got hurt. And then again in 2012, they had the best record in the NFC while leading them to he had the highest completion percentage in the league. And then obviously in 2016, he ends up winning MVP en route to one of the most dominant offensive seasons by a team ever. Matt Ryan has had a lot of success with the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan has done a lot as far as overall passing statistics go, and he is definitely deserving of being number 2 on this list. At number 1, however, we're going to go with wide receiver Julio Jones. Julio Jones is one of the best players at his position, one of the top 10 players at his position. Matt Ryan is not, unfortunately. That's why Julio Jones ends up becoming the number one player. I will admit I kind of have a little personal bias in this. I know some people will argue that Matt Ryan is going to be number one because of the MVP. I don't think so personally, though. Even taking my bias out aside, Julio Jones has done something that very few receivers in the history of the NFL have ever done, and that's, having 1,300 receiving yards. He had it for 6 straight seasons. For any receiver to have it that long amount of time is just insane. In my opinion, he should have been first-team All-Pro multiple times more than he actually was. He's led the league in receiving yards per game 3 times in his career, receiving yards twice. He should have had more touchdowns, but he wasn't as big of a red zone threat, but absolute athletic freak. And he just retired. So congratulations to a great career. Finished his career with 1,300 yards. And like I said, one of the greatest receivers of all time and the greatest Atlanta Falcon of all time.